It's just a couple minutes past 7, and I guess we'll get started, and other people will be joining us, I assume, as we go along. First, I'd like to welcome you to a conversation tonight about our goal is going to be primarily to talk about how do we talk with our families, with each other, and particularly our children, about the challenges, the conflicts that are going on in the Middle East at this point in time. I'm Larry Berkowitz with Riverside Trauma Center, a program of Riverside Community Care. Joined by Waheeda. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, everyone. I am Waheeda Saif. I'm the program coordinator at Riverside Trauma Center.
Great. Many of you also know us as one of our sister programs here, which is Mindwise Innovations, which supports many programs throughout the country. Quick word about who we are as Riverside Trauma Center. Our goal as a program is to support communities, individuals, schools, workplaces after highly stressful events. So anything from large-scale natural disasters and major incidents that are going on like this in the world are the kinds of things that we are geared towards trying to help support people through. We do a lot of work with schools, workplaces, agencies, also after smaller critical incidents. But indeed, tonight, our conversation is about a very difficult topic, one that many of us seem to be feeling very acutely, especially here in the Boston area and throughout the country as well. Our hopes for tonight, first, Waheeda and I will be talking a little bit about just some of our thoughts, trying to respond to some of the questions. Thank you for those of you who submitted questions already. And just based on our experience and expert tips from others doing this kind of work, we're going to talk some about how do we talk to our children, young children, to adolescents about the events that are going on right now. And our hope and goal is that we won't spend too much time talking, maybe half of our time, but to leave time to make sure that we get to hear from you, to hear your thoughts and questions. And especially would love to hear about conversations you're having that you feel have gone well, because truly when it comes to your children, you're the experts. You know what works best with your kids. And if you've had any opportunities, then that you feel at work, we'd love to hear about them. A quick note, our plan is that we'll be recording this conversation, particularly the first part when we get into questions. If the questions start to get specific, maybe we'll stop recording so you can feel comfortable asking those questions. Many people have asked us if we could record because they weren't able to join us, and we'd like to have others have a chance to observe and to learn from us and you as well. Waheeda?
Thank you, Larry. I too want to welcome everyone here tonight. I know many of you, like us, are coming here with really heavy hearts, and so I want to thank you for coming to a conversation that can be difficult. We will do our best to create as much of a holding and safer environment as we can for this conversation. I want to also say that we believe very, very strongly here at the Trauma Center that there's no conversation that is too difficult to have. We will have the hard conversations. We will have the really difficult conversations, and we will also do our best to give you the knowledge and sort of even the expertise that we have on how to have those conversations with your children. What I think we are not able to do is to tell you how to have those specifics of the conversation. I know a lot of questions came in that said, and how do I have this particular conversation? How do I say that particular thing? So there's some things that we can't tell you what to say because you wouldn't want us to tell you what to say to your kiddos. You wouldn't want the Riverside Trauma Center to to tell you what to say. You wouldn't want Larry or Waheeda to tell you what to say to your kiddo about the history or the politics or the intricacies of what was happening out there in the Middle East between Israel and Gaza, and all of those intricacies. We'll tell you a lot about how to manage those conversations and the difficulty of those conversations, and how to manage your reactions too, because we're all having really, really big emotions. So we'll talk about all of those things, but you wouldn't want us to give us those details. So we'll talk about all of those things, and then we'll give you the tools about how to get that information to then have those conversations. So I do hope that you still walk away with a lot of what you're hoping to get out of this, even though we won't be able to give you the nitty-gritty. I hope we give you the tools to where to then go find the nitty-gritty and put it all together to then manage to have those conversations.
Right. Such an important point, Waheeda, that the family values, the personal values that you want as part of your family come from you, right?
Exactly.
And probably an important point is, though, before they can come from you, you want to make sure you're in a good place, right? That you're as comfortable as you can be with just managing. We, as the adults, we need to manage our own reactions as best we can. And Waheeda, I love how earlier today you reminded me that it's best if we're having those conversations with our friends, our partners, our family, before we start talking to our kids whenever possible, so that we're as calm, that we don't scare our kids or frighten them as we're talking about the issues. Our kids pick up so well on how we're doing emotionally, right? So best to try to have that centered in before we're having these difficult conversations.
Exactly, Larry, because a lot of times information is coming to us so fast, so furious, and a lot of it, and we'll get into this a little bit later on too when we talk about media, but so much of this information is coming to us, and coming to us, and not all of it is accurate, right? So we need to, as adults, sort it out, make sure we have the accurate information, and especially if we have older kids, we can do a little bit of that with them, but we need to figure all of that out, manage that piece of it before we then and manage our we remember like Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers and all of that, like sort out our feelings, sort out our big thoughts and all of that before we then approach our kids to have these thoughts, because we cannot be up here, if we're sort of thinking about where we are in our bodies, we can't be up here with our thoughts and feelings and have sort of a calm thoughtful conversation with our kids, right?
Yeah, thanks. And so once we're there, or to have the conversation, or ready to continue the conversations we've been having, probably the first word of advice we could offer is to check in with what your kids already know, with what they've heard. Some of the questions we've received have asked, well, if my kid hasn't brought it up, should I ask? We think it's valuable to ask. This is so big and it's so prevalent, so much out there in the media and people talking about it. If they have older siblings, if they're on the playground, on a bus, kids are hearing about these things, right? So we think it's important to just check in and to mention if you haven't had the conversations already. So what have you heard? We've been getting questions from teachers too about, so do we bring this up in the classroom, or how do we bring it up? That's a little more delicate, and I think you're going to need to talk with your administrators, with your district, to get some guidance on, especially at the elementary grades, how much are you going to leave that to families? How much are you going to have those conversations and make sure there's in the classrooms, and make sure there's some agreement on that, although it's likely to pop up. So yeah, at home, it's probably wise to ask our kids, so there's some stuff going on. What have you heard about this? If anything, are your friends talking about it? What have you heard? And to let our kids know if they have any questions, we hope they'll ask us, that we're here to talk about these things and to answer the questions for them. So we want to check in. We want to keep in mind developmental differences, right? So the way you have that kind of conversation with a high schooler is going to be much more similar to how we would have those conversations together as adults, right? For our younger kids, for our elementary school kids, we're going to keep it pretty simple, right? We're going to keep it to some real basics. And we might even think about, for like preschoolers, do we even bring it up at all? Some of this, it's controversial. Maybe sometimes I would say, no, we don't talk about it with, the real little kids, our toddlers, our preschoolers. Although we got to keep in mind, they're often hearing what's going on in the home. Many of us have our radios, our TVs on, especially all the time right now if we're trying to keep up with the news. Our kids are often picking up on that. So if we think they've been seeing it or hearing about it, we might just want to ask what they've heard or talk about it in very simple, basic terms with our littlest ones. Speaking of that, sometimes when children get alarmed, upset, feel stressed, they will sometimes return to earlier developmental behaviors, that help them feel more comfortable. So if our kids are more anxious or alarmed by the news that they've been hearing about, or the conversations they're hearing about, the conflict that's going on, and the killings, we might see them starting to crawl back in our beds where they haven't done that for a while, or being a little more clingy or spending a little more time, or maybe even being a little more combative or something. So wouldn't be surprising to see a little bit of return in some of our kids to some earlier stages where they felt a little more comfortable. That won't go on for a long time. But it's just a sign often that they need a little more support, right? One other thing just to look for that we always like to mention, at the trauma center, we often talk about a wide range of domains within which people react to potentially traumatic and highly stressful situations in their lives. Some of that, we start with just thinking about emotions, right? There's an incredible range of emotions that we've been hearing people talk about. I think, Waheeda and I have certainly acknowledged that we're having them ourselves as we've talked with each other. Everything from just numbness, being puzzled, anger, blaming, deep sadness, just this incredible range, right, of emotions that we all have. Some people have all of them, some people have one or two, but it's not just the emotions, right? There's some cognitive stuff, like the thinking kinds of things that go on. I don't know, have any of you been having some trouble concentrating lately, feel a little distracted by everything that's going on in the news? That would be totally expected right now, particularly for people who are more impacted, for those of us who have family who may be involved or are worrying about people we care about who are in the places, who are over in Israel or Gaza or the countries around there who might be, under threat. We're our anxiety is higher, probably our worries are higher, our thinking and maybe more distracted. That cognitive stuff, not surprising for some people to have trouble turning it off. That laying in bed at night and kind of looping, thinking through these things, not at all surprising. So we respond in emotional ways and these cognitive ways. And, this is a time that we may have a whole host of spiritual reactions too, a whole range, anything from, feeling how could a just and reasonable God allow these things to happen on the one hand extreme, on the other extreme, turning towards our faith for support and comfort in a protective way, which is wonderful. A lot of existential questions come up at these times. I guess the point here is there's an amazing range of reactions that we all have. They're expected, they're normal. Not everyone's going to have the same ones. There's no right or wrong way for us to go through this kind of stuff. Waheeda, you mentioned something about that we were going to talk about media. I think that would be a really important part of this conversation. Do you want to say something about that?
Yes, Larry. I think I could, and we could all probably as parents, right? Those of us who are parents, educators too. I know there's a lot of educators here tonight. Talk about media, probably for the whole hour, right? Media is, and I don't want to just completely demonize media, because I think it has its place. It's really important, because I first want to talk about if you yourself find yourself engaging in a lot of media right now, and you're like really on all of your socials a lot, right? And you're like, I just need I need a little bit more news from Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it these days, formerly known as. I just need a little bit more information here. I'm just going to hop on Instagram, or if you're using even Facebook, whatever, or TikTok, or whatever it is that you are using to get. There's a real reason for that, and there's a real human need for that, and that is especially in times of crisis, we we seek out information, and there's lots of evidence to show that, especially in times of crisis, information becomes just as critical as food and water and shelter. So just as we are seeking out food, water, shelter, we seek out information, and the reason for that is it becomes a source of survival, right? So right now, especially if you have loved ones, especially if you have family, especially if you have any reason, right? Or you belong to one of the religious or ethnic groups that are being that are especially affected right now, right? You're Jewish, you're Muslim, you're Palestinian, you're Israeli, and you are now, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later on, you are now suddenly more affected or worried about your safety. You are seeking out more information for your own safety and if I can take it a step further, for your survival, right? For the safety and survival of yourself and your family. So that's what you're doing, right? So if you find yourself more tuned into media, that's what the reason behind that is. And I'm gonna go ahead and say that's fine. There's a reason for that. And um are and unfortunately, that comes at a cost to us, right? Because when we seek out that information, I'm sort of taking a peek at the questions that we will get to later. Someone said, well, how do we know everything is how do we know what we are getting is all accurate? That's the thing. We know by now that everything on the media, we have to be very careful what we are consuming on media, right? Because not everything is accurate. The second part of media is that the more you consume it, the more, and we know all about algorithms and all of the, I don't have to lecture you on that. It is built to keep you engaged, right? So the more you consume it, the more it is going to continue to have you locked into it. The second part about media is our kids, especially the older ones, are also on social media, right? And that's also, we have to worry about it ourselves, but we have to worry about our kids on it. And I would say two things about media. One, be careful about the amount of time you're spending on it. So I wouldn't say like don't be on media at all. No, I think there is, if I were to say that, it would be unrealistic. You cannot do that, especially in this day and age. You would feel like I was taking, like that analogy I gave of food and water and shelter. It would feel like that. It would feel like an essential part of survival was being taken away. So think about how much you're engaging in it. But the second part is, I think the conversation we need to have, especially with our children, is being very thoughtful and careful consumers of media, right? We don't want it to consume us. We want to consume it. And so how are we going to engage with media? How are we going to use media? And on the other hand, and we're going to get to this also, you know, how do we not feel helpless? We're going to get to this much later. We can also use media to our benefit, right? So if we are at some point feeling helpless and want to do something about the things that are happening, media and social media can become a very useful tool in engaging with the world around us, right? So that's another thing. But one thing we want to be really careful of, and this is something I was talking to my own teenager about just today, was what are we want to be very, very careful about the images that we are taking in, right? Children, adults, all across the board, because you cannot unsee and you cannot unhear images that you are taking in. So that is something we want to be very thoughtful and careful of. So that is at least a conversation that I would really urge you to have with your children. And so that's one very important point. The other important point is, I think we as parents think that we are very careful about, we have our phones and we're like, we're going to scroll and I'm going to sort of like, tilt it this way and my kid's not seeing it. And I'm not saying you're not careful, but I think many of us are not digital natives in the same way that our kiddos are, and they see and hear everything. So I just want to put a word of caution out there that they see and hear way, way, way more than we think they see and hear. So just be please extra, extra, extra careful of any media that you're consuming around little eyes and ears, because I promise you they are seeing and hearing way, way, way more than we think they are. And what Larry was saying earlier about little kids and having the conversation or not having the conversation with them, I think that's why I always think it's important to just go ahead and have the conversation, even with very young kids, and of course in age appropriate ways, because they're just exposed to so much, even because of older siblings or whatever is around them. And one thing is because we just slip up so much because of media. So,
Yeah, I really appreciate you talking about the social media and kids in particular, Waheeda. And, one of our coworkers just the other day was talking about how their teenager was saying, all right, so I'm not on social media, but I'm hearing about all these awful things that are on there and what my friends are telling me they saw. So they don't even have to be looking at it to be hearing it. So I think it's an important question to ask our kids. What are you hearing or seeing on social media? What are your friends telling you? And to that, and for us to have questions about, so what are our trusted sources of information? I think that's important. You ask the question, how do we know what's real, what's not real? We have to go to what we feel are our trusted sources of information and be good consumers, and assuming that social media is probably less likely than some of the traditional media, probably not 100%, to have information that we can feel a little more confident in. And I even encourage people, we do this in our home, is to look at different media, to maybe go to the media that we trust, but occasionally look at what the media who has a different slant than we would normally look at, to see what they're saying and covering too, just so we have a little sense of what are two sides of this reporting, so that we can start making some judgments about what seems real and what are we hearing and trusting. But yeah, try to have more than one source, I would say, and to continue having these conversations with our kids. As parents, people often ask us, what do we do? We talked about these kinds of things at the beginning of the pandemic, and certainly after other major situations that have happened here in our state and nationally, internationally. When we think about traumatic events and how to help our kids at school, our children at home, manage that, there are three things that come to mind for us. We often talk about trying to establish a sense of safety, predictability, and control. That those kinds of things help center kids and adults at a time like this. So what does that mean? Safety, predictability, and control. As they hear about the fact that there's a war going on, and I was actually just, I was talking to a colleague on WhatsApp just earlier today, who's in another country and in South America, and asking, so what's going on there? What are you hearing? How are people reacting? He's saying he's hearing lots of worries that somehow they'll get drawn into a war, that there's going to be a major war, right? Our kids are hearing this. Our people are hearing these kinds of things. We have to have the conversations, particularly with our children, about trying to assure some safety, letting them know that we as parents are going to do everything in our power as best we can to try to keep them and our families safe. We don't want to offer 100% guarantees, because we can never do that, but just saying things like, I'm going to do everything I can as your parent to make sure we stay safe. And if you believe what I'm about to say, you say this, which is, and I believe our community, the police, our government are doing everything they can to keep all of us safe here. In some communities, that will help people feel safe. In some communities, that statement would not help people feel safe. So you judge it based on what is real for you. That everyone in our community is working together. Everyone in our religious organization is supporting each other. Whatever it is that helps you and your kids feel a little safer. These are kinds of conversations we want to be having. We might want to remind kids that for the most part, all the conflict they're hearing about and seeing about is happening thousands of miles away. Although we know that unfortunately there are some worries here in our country too about how people treat each other. So again, some conversations about thinking about how do we talk to our children about what we'll do to try to help them keep safe. and what they should be doing and thinking about too, especially for our teenagers. Are there things that, I mean, many communities have to have difficult conversations with our kids about where they are and the kinds of things that they're talking about in places and who they're with. And, just those are unfortunate conversations, but now's the time we may be having to re-up those conversations with our children, right? So safety, predictability. What's predictability? That's about making sure we try to keep our regular routines as much as possible. Keeping our established routines going and trying not to differ from them whenever possible. And safety, predictability, and control. Control is pretty hard, right? This situation's pretty much out of our control in terms of what's going on around us in the world. But what are the things that in day to day that we can control? Those are important things to keep up. Some of that is how much we're paying attention to the media, right? Some of that might be, can we control the ways in which we react and try to offer help? Waheeda, you mentioned that we would be talking about some of the things we could do. Some ways to get some sense of control is to think about, are there ways we can contribute? Can we be writing letters of support? Can we as a family be sending funds to the Red Cross or religious organizations or aid groups? Or what are the things that are within our power so that we don't feel helpless? One of our coworkers often says, I appreciate this whenever he reminds us that we may feel vulnerable at times, but we're not helpless. There's some things we could do. We can be writing letters to our legislators to ask them to stand up for certain things, whatever our beliefs and values are. To me, that's connected with some sense of control around that sense of when we feel helpless or vulnerable. Waheeda, other thoughts you have?
Yeah, thank you, Larry. I want to remind people that and because and it's truly just a reminder, because I know you know this already. Again, for people here who are here as parents and people here who are here as guardians, and then everyone here who's here as educators, you know this, that children are just exquisite, just readers of us emotionally. They know, right? We can say whatever we want from our mouths, but they can read us so much better, right? My own kids sort of, just floor me every time. Like I can sort of do whatever I want here, and then they'll be like, how's your day? And I'm like, like these therapist kids, right? But it's not just therapist kids. It's truly they just know. So I say that to say that we need to, none of this we started off the conversation with this, and we're sort of coming to the tail end of it. We just have one or two things we want to cover before we start answering specifically your questions. None of what we have said will work if we don't manage our own reactions, right? And that's why I sort of want to hammer in that point of whether it's our little ones or not so little ones. This is a heavy time. And I was going to say I don't want to presume that, but I think it's okay for me to presume that and make that assumption. And so it's not okay for us, and it's actually not appropriate for us to approach our kids without managing and sorting out some of that stuff as adults first, right? And we always say modeling is good, right? So I don't get me wrong, right? I don't want you to misconstrue that and say, oh no, I can't have any reactions in front of the kids. No. Have some emotion in front of the kids. That's great. Modeling is good. They need to learn from adults how you can have a whole range of reactions. That's good. But we need to first sort through some of our some of our big thoughts and react, like big ones, right? Uh, Thoughts and reactions with our peers. So like, as Larry was saying, with our partners, with our friends, with others who are in our circles first. And when we have done that, then we can have some of these conversations with our kids, right? Then we go to them and say, hey, I just want to say, I had, I wonder, have you heard, or what kind of conversations are you having at school, or what's coming up for you, and then help them sort through their big thoughts and reactions, right? And when they give you something, say, you know what? I was thinking that too, or I was having that kind of reaction too, or actually, I'm surprised you're feeling that way because I was feeling the opposite way. Or when you say that, that makes me feel, and you can sort of bounce things off of each other, right? But if you haven't done that yet, don't make them take care of you, right? That's kind of not, especially for little ones, not necessarily an appropriate job for them to do.
I
Um,
appreciate your saying, Waheeda, though, that it's good for us probably to label some of our own emotions as our kids start talking about it with us. Yeah, this stuff makes me fill in the blank. It makes me really sad when I see this. It makes me angry when I see this. It makes me my heart hurt, or just to label it so we're modeling. Yeah, great point, Waheeda, that we're modeling for our kids how to talk about these emotional experiences without them being so big that it's going to frighten our kids.
exactly. And it's, just a reminder, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? We have to, if we're, it's there's it seems to be, and I don't know certainly where the end game is for this. So do take care of yourself. We'll talk about a little bit about self-care in a little bit. So do what you need to do to take care of yourselves, take care of your kids. Sleep is huge. I don't know how you're sleeping, but if you're not sleeping well, that's a really good indicator that maybe you're not doing so hot, right? So take care of your sleep. Make sure your social connections are like, we just know that if we're socially connected, we're doing better. My phone has not stopped. It is like, I mean, I'm sort of like, do I need to turn off notification? Like, but I don't want to, because people are sort of, it's a good off the, so connect with people who will make you feel good, right? But also, if this is not the time, if you need a break, that's a good thing too, right? Like, know what your limits are. So take care of take care of yourself. And whatever, what strategies and what self-care things work for you. And this may be the time to sort of engage in that self-care so that you can be there for your kids, right? Because if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of your kids, right? So I want to just shift gears a little bit and spend a few moments talking about our our more vulnerable communities right now, specifically the communities that I know are feeling that are hurting more and feel more targeted right now. And that's specifically the Jewish communities, the Muslim communities, the Israeli community, the Palestinian communities. And if you belong to those communities, um, I I know that one, those communities are just hurting more, but two, as I said, they're feeling more targeted and need more care right now. So I think conversations with those kids need to be more nuanced, right? Need to be all of those things we talked about already need to be there, and then plus some, right? So if you belong to those communities, those conversations need to also include an extra check-in, but an extra check-in that's it has to be done a little bit more delicately. So everything I said about manage your own reactions, and I get it. Like if you're a parent, you are probably feeling really anxious. I don't know. I don't want to put that on you. But if you are feeling more anxious about your kiddo, please manage that first before you approach your kid. Because the last thing you would want to do is put that in on your kid. Because maybe your kid is feeling or really threatened or heightened, stuff at school. But maybe they're not, right? And the last thing you would want to do is put your stuff onto them. Right? And I'll use my personal example. I'm Muslim, and I have 3 kiddos, and I've asked all of them, right? And I worry. But what I didn't want to do is sort of be like and sort of put my anxiety on them. So I've casually asked them, and they're like, "Mom, we're fine. It sucks. It really sucks. We're fine. No one said anything to us. It's cool. My teacher asked me, and it was really nice that they asked me, but it was I'm fine." Right. And so I won't go into details because I want to protect their privacy. But that's, I think, probably, if I may offer, I think the better way to do it. Because I get it, as parents, we get really anxious and we're really protective of our kids. But we don't want to raise their anxieties by sort of bringing our anxiety into the mix. And on the other side, if you are in communities that surround these communities, you can have that conversation. I know lots of schools have anti-bullying programs and non-bias programs and anti-bias programs and things like that. This would be the time to sort of remind our children who may be around those communities to have, to be upstanders and not bystanders and things like that, that this is the time to sort of, have those reminder conversations and things like that. So I've been talking for a long time. I do want to leave some time for conversation, but I do want to bring that up, that I know there's a lot of anxiety in these communities, and rightfully so, because we know that in the aftermath of stuff like this happening, there is, anti-Semitism goes up, Islamophobia goes up. All of that is, proven in research. And anytime hate against one group goes up, hate against all minority groups goes up. So all of that is proven. So all of that is valid. But the best thing we can do as adults is be level-headed ourselves, and help manage that for our kids. However, if you have any indication that anything is in fact happening to your child, or there's any indication, absolutely reach out to the counselor, reach out to the principal, reach out to the teacher, and then you need to rally the village. Right? You should not wait. You should rally the village, get the team on board, and absolutely reach out at that point, and make sure everyone is aware, so that is brought down, because schools should not be an unsafe place for any child. They should never ever feel unsafe going to school. And so if you've reached out and don't get a response, that you should keep upping the ante until someone listens, and that school is now a safe place for that child.
Yeah, great points. So love that you're talking about school needs to be safe, home needs to be safe. And you mentioned self-care for us as adults. Just quickly before we turn to answering some of your questions, I think it's also important to remind our kids that they probably have some strategies for helping themselves too, if they're anxious, if they're worried about things, and just asking them, what are the things you do when you feel a little upset? What helps you feel a little better? What helps you feel calm? What helps you feel happier is not the right word, but sometimes we have to use simple terms with younger kids, particularly. And that could be anything. Spending time with their friends, spending time with their parents, listening to music, spending time with their pets. We want to remind them that there are things that they can do to help themselves feel calmer, right? And to help deal with some of the worries. Those are good strategies for kids to have. And I I turn to one of my mentors often in these moments, Mr. Rogers, who after some major disasters and after 9/11 and things like, his message to young kids always was, look for the people who are helpers. Look for the people you know who are helpers, because they're going to be there for you. Just reminders to kids that they've got people who are going to be there to help them. You will be, hopefully their teachers will be, the counselors at school are there as good resources. And they've got some skills too that they can use to help themselves manage tough times. We have been talking a lot. We've been talking some generalities. I see there's some really amazing questions, some that are way bigger than probably we can answer in a few moments. But we're going to ask our colleague Julia if she'll help us sort through some of the questions. Julia, some of the ones that have come in earlier and now that you think we should try to get to.
Yes, Larry, Waheeda, thank you so much. I always feel grateful to be your colleague and learn from both of you, but tonight, all the more so. We've received, as you're noting, many questions on how to have these conversations with children of varying ages. Could you give some guidance around how you would navigate these conversations specifically by age? So little kids, maybe elementary, middle school students and children, and then teenagers?
Sure. I think it might be easiest to start with the older kids, adolescents, because that's going to be probably pretty similar to how do we talk to each other as adults, right? They're trying to explore the world and understand it. They're the world's greatest philosophers, really, developing opinions and have nuanced understandings. They're watching our opinions and reactions and are often critical of them just because we're their parents, right? But they need us. They need our guidance too. They want to know what we're thinking and hearing at times too. So I think we have those conversations. We raise them. We ask. Sometimes maybe putting it one off is helpful to say, so what are your friends saying about this? Or what are you seeing on social media about it? So if they're not comfortable saying directly, maybe you can move it over one, to someone else, displace it a little bit, right? There was a question I noticed, what if our kids don't want to talk about it? Okay, maybe it's not troubling them right now. Maybe they're not tuned into this, or maybe they're still trying to figure it out and understand their own feelings before they talk about it. But I wouldn't ask once. Come back to it another day, another time. Maybe when some news is on, or somebody in the house is reading the newspaper and you're saying, gee, I'm seeing this stuff again, and it just makes me feel so fill in the blank, makes me feel really sad, makes me angry, whatever. I'm curious, what have you been thinking about this at all? What are your thoughts about it? Show curiosity. I think that's the best way for any age. Just showing that you're curious about their thoughts, I think can be helpful. Our younger kids, maybe the youngest ones, like we said, our preschoolers and stuff, it's got to be really basic, right? Really simple. That they're people who are fighting and having a hard time getting along together, and everybody's worried about that because people are hurting each other, and we don't like seeing that. We want to make sure that everyone stays as safe as possible. Honestly, my opinion is I think that messages of no matter what our belief systems are, at the end of the day, everyone who's involved are humans. And what would be ideal is if we could find some ways to have peace and that nobody gets hurt. I think those are important. That's an important message to children. We may have too strong feelings at the moment to get to that right now, but I would imagine and hope that ultimately that's most people's goal, right? And then we can talk to kids about that. It's just like when you and a friend might have a disagreement on the playground or at an activity or at school. Sometimes you get heated and start yelling at each other. This is little kids, right? Sometimes people in whole countries, whole communities, whole neighborhoods start doing that and fighting with each other. And sometimes they end up hurting each other, and we don't like seeing that. That's a shame. People end up getting hurt. No one wants to see that. Real basic terms, like giving them an example of something they might know, like when friends fight or something like that. The middle ages, upper elementary school, middle school. I don't know, Waheeda, I'm talking too much. Do you have any thoughts about that age range?
Yeah, so sometimes so kids are really amazing in that, like, kids like read and watch TV, right? So I always start from a place of curiosity. I'm like, do you know what war is? And they'd be like, yeah, like, how do you know about war? Because I read this book or watched that show. So they know about things. Like, a lot of times parents are really afraid to talk about death because they'll be like, oh, my kids never experienced death. And I'll be like, well, you'll be surprised because they read, right? And kids will be like, yeah, I read this, I read that, I saw that here, I saw that there, I know about war from this book. So if you just ask them, I bet you they can give you an example of like, well, I read this book and it had this war, or this like Harry Potter had this like huge Hogwarts war, whatever, right? And you'll be like, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening, right?
Yeah.
And if that's where you want to start, you can just use that as an example, right? And you'll be surprised actually like how much kids can offer you if you just start from a place of curiosity and ask them to explain it to you.
Nice. Nice. What else, Julia?
Thank you both. So you have talked about safety, predictability, and control. And we're getting a lot of questions about what we can do in the classroom, in schools, to best provide support to students in very diverse communities with both Israeli and Palestinian families. Do you comment on that?
Yeah, so I think, it's, I think teachers are in a really rough spot. So I do want to acknowledge that, right? And I think, you know, I think keeping physical safety is paramount. But then I do think you have to sort of redirect the kids to have those conversations. This is a little bit of a cop-out, which I get. To have those conversations if they're younger at home, and then again, we have we have really difficult conversations at school, and we say all the time, like, let's talk about suicide, let's talk about like civics talks about all kinds of really difficult topics, right? So can we talk about this even from a historical perspective? Like, can we agreeing that we won't come to agreements, right? And knowing that at baseline, like, we respect people's humanity, right? So I think, like, if we can, and I'm not saying this is like the teacher's job to like do any or all of this, but knowing that we have to somehow know how to coexist in these spaces, but also there's an opportunity to learn. Like, we go to school to learn, right? So there's a learning opportunity here too. And if we can sort of start from there, or have some conversations there, like just a place of curiosity and conversation and learning, like that's what I would say. And again, if my fear is if we just shut down conversation, and that's the message we're sending is, again, we can't talk about this, because if the adults can't talk about this, where do we leave our kids, right? Like, that's what I fear. So if we can establish physical safety, and if we can say, hey, at the base of this, like, there's our humanity, and then let's talk about it, right? Like, there's history here, there's conversations to be had, let's just have a human conversation.
Yeah,
we're at school, let's learn.
I love that here in this space, in this classroom, we're all here together, we're all humans, we're all friends, and we have to respect one another. So let's have respectful conversations. We might have different opinions, but let's have respectful conversations about it. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Waheeda, I think this is one that you have spoken a little bit about, but I want to bring us back to a question somebody asked this evening. So they write, my kids are Palestinian American. If parents are concerned for their children's safety due to their identity, what would you recommend parents tell them? This person says, particularly younger kids who maybe aren't able to understand the nuance of the conflict. And I want to know, we also received questions similarly from teachers and parents who are concerned for youth who identify with many of the impacted groups. So stepping out a little bit and generalizing as well.
I missed it a little bit. Could you repeat that? I was like reading and doing a couple of things.
Yeah. If parents are concerned for their children's safety due to their identity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you recommend parents tell them?
Sorry, Larry, were you answering? Go ahead.
Please go ahead, and then I'll add anything else that,
Oh, okay.
that you don't cover.
If they're concerned, and I think right now a lot of parents are concerned. First, I would say, please, like, do a check and really just, like, is this your fear? Is this but after that, if you are concerned, please talk to, bring that concern to the school. School should be a safe place. I really worry when school becomes a place where a child is afraid to go to. That should never be, home should be a safe place, school should be a safe place. This is like sacred spaces, right? It should never be something that a child should be afraid to be at home and afraid to go to school. So this is what I worry about. And bring it to the appropriate sources. So guidance counselor, school counselor, teachers, although teachers are probably not the right ones, but find your allies. And if that's not it, escalate it up the chain, go to the principal if you have to, talk to them. So do not stop knocking on doors until someone listens to you, is what I would say, because the child's safety is paramount. So that's what I would say. Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, absolutely. That's at school. And I think outside of school too, we have to be thinking about the messages we give our kids. They're always there, sadly, about safety. I've been hearing from religious communities in the last week that they're increasing security in their facilities, which sad that we have to do this, but for some people that feels comforting, for others it doesn't. I've heard one faith leader recently tell some members of their community, we hope you'll feel comfortable coming here. We have increased our security. We feel okay here, but if you're not comfortable at this point, you have to be your best guide as to what, will feel comfortable to you. I would hope in communities that people can be having conversations with the leaders in the communities, either their faith leaders or even the community leaders, about what are we doing to help people in our town, in our city, to feel safe. These are the moments where, we call in Cambridge, we call on the peace commissioner. In other communities, we call on the committees that have been formed to have conversations about how do we do our best to ensure safety for our entire community, so that everyone can feel safe here. And these are I love your term. We want to escalate these conversations so that people can feel safe as they're going about in their communities, and to know that there are ways to report issues and to use the existing. Again, I know some people would feel more comfortable than others calling the police to get support or help, but we have to report things if we're seeing hate crimes occur, for example. We need to make sure that we know what the mechanisms are for reporting those and dealing with those, and we're advocating, to make sure that there are protections as best as possible.
I want to close this out by asking you both a question that we talk about on our team, and often when we talk about it, we reference the 3 R's, and I wonder if one of you might share what those are. The question we've heard a few folks ask is, how do we support our colleagues? How do we support one another through this?
Yeah, we did talk a little bit about self-care, right? And for the adults, for the kids, and you're right, for those of us who work in the fields who are helping support and try to care for others, these are times we have to be paying attention to our own care too. And the 3 R's, thank you for raising that. When we talk about that, we're talking about starting from a point of kind of reflection, thinking about, where are we in this issue? What's important to me as an individual? What is it about the work that I do as an educator, as a community helper, whatever it is? What brings passion to me about this work? And what can I do? And to really think about the relationships we have with people and what do we want them to look like and stand for, to really reflect on those things. And the second piece then is to make sure that we have ways that we regulate our emotions. Waheeda's been talking about that a lot, and that's so essential. What are the things that help us feel calm, to get our heart rate down, to get our breathing, regulated, to make sure that we're feeling, if we're distressed, that we have some strategies for helping ourselves calm, literally, physically. The breathing is about the only part of our autonomic nervous system that we can control, right? And that can help us calm ourselves down. So we need to be sure we have some strategies for ourselves. If we don't have them, let's look for them or get ideas of where to find those, and get help with that. And finally, what are the day-to-day things we could do to help ourselves feel refreshed, to feel revived, to feel rejuvenated, to feel, and again, I'm not talking about running a marathon or world peace or a triathlon. What are the little things that we can do to help ourselves? Take moments out to breathe, to take moments out to connect with the people who are important to us, to make sure we get a few minutes out in nature, to be with others who are important to us. What are those things? Taking the time out to read the book, maybe watching a little less of the news as a strategy for self-care. We have to be intentional about these things. The great Charlie Parker, the great jazz saxophonist, once said, if you don't live it, it won't come out your horn. So if we're trying to help other people, try to help our children, our students, or the other people in our communities that we're trying to support, we have to find ways to be living it ourselves too, the self-care, so that we can help them take care of themselves and the issues that are going on around us.
I was sort of going through I'm going through
We've got many great questions here. I'm noticing we only have about 2 or 3 minutes left.
yeah, it's I see a lot of questions, and I want to just add that I see a lot of questions about sort of and I think the theme of like feeling helpless or not being able to say things or not being being caught up in things. I said we would get back to this, so I just want to make sure we get back to this. I think the act of doing can also be an act of self-care, right? So I just want to highlight that. And that act of doing can be anything. It can be checking in on your neighbor. I've received many messages of support. I know Larry said he has. So checking in on someone who you think needs checking in. It could be, writing to your Congress member. It could be, I know many people who are, sort of received letters from school districts and were like, this is not the right type of letter that I wanted, right? And then wrote back saying, this, you need to do better. And I know many people attending protests. I know many people and sending notes of support and love and food and like everything in between. I also know people who were like, I need to bow out. I can't show up because this is too much. That is also an act of self-care, right? So I want to personally give you permission to bow out when you need to. But I also want to say that an act of doing can also be an incredible act of self-care. So you just need to know what that balance is for yourself. Don't overdo it, but know where that line is for you.
It's about empowering too. Yeah, I like that, Waheeda.
Exactly.
Some of the teachers are asking for ideas or suggestions how to do this. I'm not very familiar with these, but one of our colleagues sent some wonderful ideas and quotes just today, that came from the Facing History group and organization and website. And in it, they mentioned, I haven't looked at this yet, but they mentioned another website called, it's a organization out of the UK called Solutions, Not Sides. I'm not familiar with it, but I think we need to start looking at some of those places that really focus on this for educators. How do you talk about those these issues in ways that are supportive and open and helpful in terms of helping people feel supported and learn? And I think there are some good organizations out there, not the work we directly do. I wish we could go on for hours. We want to thank you and appreciate your time and appreciate the work you're doing as parents, as educators, as community helpers. Thank you for joining us. We're honored that you would do that and take time, especially at night. We know this is a hard time. It's a hard time for many people. Many of us are feeling directly impacted. Our communities are impacted. The people we care about are impacted. And there is this incredible range of emotions and feelings. Waheeda, I appreciate your saying this is, it's a marathon, not a sprint. We get through this in community, and we should be turning to our communities right now, our friends, our families, our faith communities, whatever it is, wherever it is that you get support.
Thank you. Thank you.
Again, thank you.
Larry. Thank you for being here.
Appreciate time. Yeah.
Thank you. You all take care of yourselves and each other.
Take good care.